In the last 18 months, Peter has completed assignments across our globe, including being part of the US Chemical Safety Board on the Macondo Deepwater Horizon. From 2005 to 2009, Peter was the Group Manager for Operational Excellence in Risk in Caltex and a member of the Caltex leadership team. From 2001 to 2005, Peter was the Principal Architect for the development of the National Offshore Petroleum Safety Authority. This afternoon, Peter will highlight important issues on how ANTS makes not just good sense in trying to improve our safety culture at all levels, but makes better sense in terms of good company management and governance. So Peter, would you like to come to the front? Thank you.
Having said I know nothing about the mining industry, I owe a great debt to the mining industry on two fronts. The most inspirational line manager I ever had that I worked for was a mining engineer, a guy called John King, who was very influential in the setting up the safety case concept and the offshore safety regime after the Piper Alpha disaster in the UK. And secondly, and this is very topical, of course, with Margaret Thatcher's demise, the mining industry disappeared, of course, partly as a result of Margaret Thatcher's actions, although there were some other economic circumstances that people will be aware of. But we found ourselves suddenly able to recruit from the mining industry, deep mine coal, and the mining engineers that we were able to recruit were superb. They understood what CH4 was. They'd all been to coroner's inquests, sadly, but that gave them a certain edge in their passion to do the job as a regulator. They all knew what the difficulties of escape were from underground coal mines, and we have different but not dissimilar problems from offshore drilling rigs and platforms. And above all else, they really knew how to manage people, because they typically had somewhere between 600 and 1,200 people working for them underground. So from my perspective, that was a great privilege that I had to learn from those people. And interestingly, I had a training role at the time. We'd go offshore with these mining engineers, and there was an instant rapport between mining engineers and offshore installation managers in the petroleum industry. And I think it's because of that shared understanding of the dangers and risks, particularly of methane and what that can do. Okay, so what am I going to talk about today? Now, I haven't had an induction on this, so we'll see. Okay, we've made a good start. Not yet, but it's highly likely I will do before we finish. So I'm going to make those assumptions. If you disagree with them, that's fine and entirely up to you, but perhaps we could leave the disagreement on my assumptions till later on in the presentation or afterwards. And I believe, in the context of what this day is about, I honestly believe there's a significant opportunity for us to provide better quality guidance to senior managers, senior executives, on what they should do in relation to safety. Notice I said guidance. It's not possible to provide training to senior executives. I know, I've been one. We don't get trained. We might get briefed, gently offered some guidance. I might have things suggested to me, but I don't get trained. So I'm sorry, but that's how so many of the people that I meet behave. It's sad, I realise, but just bear that in mind, that's something you may need to address and tackle it slightly differently than for other people. Why the focus on senior leadership? Look, I know I don't need to make the case, but very briefly I will, and I think those quotations are what we know from our personal experience to be true. And it's what I heard this morning, expressed in slightly different ways. And I'm making the assumption that these slides will be made available to people, so don't feel you have to hurriedly write these down. You will have a set of these slides, and I've provided the references. Of course, the other reason why it's important is around culture, and the culture word raised its head quite late on today, really. It was later, just before lunch, that we really started talking about culture. I think it's got those aspects to it, but again, leadership, absolutely crucial. Now, I'm moving into the slightly more controversial stuff. And remember, I have no experience of your industry, so I'm talking about upstream oil and gas. And when I say this is what I see, this is what I see in upstream oil and gas. If any of it's the same in your industry, well, that's a conclusion you must come to, but I would be very interested to get some feedback. So this is what I see. I have absolutely no doubt about the commitment of senior executives that I've met. I'm currently working for one in the coal industry. Very impressive people, undoubtedly committed, as is his team. However, there are gaps in the knowledge that exists. Well, it's not surprising. They can't know everything about everything. And that's why they hire good quality safety people that I also have met in this company. But some of these gaps are crucial from a leadership perspective because it leads to attitudes and behaviours which aren't always helpful. They don't intend to be unhelpful, but they can be. So what do I mean by these? Oh, I just make one other comment whilst I'm on that front. Just let me just put some of these up just to see if any of these gel. After the BP Texas City disaster, where I think 15 or 17 people died at a BP refinery in just down the river from Houston in Texas City, I gave a presentation and said, well, if only 80% of incidents are caused by humans, who causes the rest? And a bright spark, and forgive me, I'm in the eastern states, so I might get away with this. Somebody from a West Australian stood up and said, yeah, but I know a farmer who was hit on the head by a meteorite. And I said, well, yeah, only in Western Australia. But of course, since then, we've had 1,000 people injured with a meteorite in the former Soviet Union country. But the reality is, I don't know where this statistic comes from, because it's quoted in Rona Flynn's book on safety at the sharp end. I really think it should be 100%, and I'm struggling to get my head around this oft-repeated statistic. And I nag every audience I get the chance to. You know what nagging is? That's just an oft-repeated truth. And my nagging is, well, somebody demonstrate to me it's not 100%, because what about all that activity about designing, engineering, managing activities? And there is an underlying importance to this statement that I want to just come on to now. And I'm going to say something that reflects a little bit of what I've heard this morning, but also what I've read. And it mainly comes from my industry, and is that this statistic about 80% of all incidents caused by human error actually gets translated by senior executives to 80% of incidents are caused by the behavior of frontline workers. That's how it gets translated in practice. They don't actually say that, but in attitudes and what you see being done, it's clear that that's the assumption being made. And I'm conscious that I have to be careful next, because I know there's some experts in the room, and I heard an excellent human factors presentation right at the start of today. But what I've just described is a classic framing error. Framing errors are those errors about how we frame a problem, and how you look, how you present the problem affects how you deal with the problem. Now let me I've been kindly lent a book called Safety at the Sharp End, A Guide to Non-Technical Skills. And inadvertently, much of the discussion I've heard today is repeating that framing error. Just let me give you, if I may, a short quote from this book. It's an excellent book, and I really commend it to people. It's called Safety at the Sharp End, A Guide to Non-Technical Skills by Rona Flynn and others. Before examining the non-technical skills, it should be emphasised that this focus on workers' behaviours is only one component of an effective safety strategy. Organisational safety, and I'll come back to that term, is influenced, blah, 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 by a number of other issues. So while this book concentrates on the skills of those operating the system, it is acknowledged that their behaviour is influenced by the behaviour of others, particularly those in managerial positions. Now, I've translated managerial positions to leadership and senior leadership. So that's my premise for where I'm going to go next. So it's all very important, this, but there has to be a real emphasis on senior leadership, because you can't affect change without taking them with you. Better still, getting them to lead the change. So that 80% stuff gets translated into a focus on behavioural safety. There is a marvellous article written by a human factors specialist on behavioural safety that is in the references. I won't tell you too much about it, other than to say behavioural safety and major accidents, a magic bullet or a shot in the dark. And that's written by a renowned human factors specialist and by a government regulator, a prestigious government regulator, all of whose work is peer-reviewed. The point I'm making here is not a black and white one. I'm not saying behavioural safety techniques don't have value. It's about horses for courses, and behavioural safety and frontline workers are very important. And we've done that pretty well. What I'm suggesting, and there's a lot more to be done about more senior managers and other professional disciplines and their contribution to safety. By the way, there is no connection whatsoever between lost time injury frequency rates, TTIFR, or what other injury-based lagging measure, and major disasters. None whatsoever, except one. If you have a very poor LTIFR rate and total recordable rate, it's highly likely you're a much greater risk of one of those rare major disasters. Doesn't work the other way around. Good LTIFR rate has no connection with disasters. If only it was so easy. And I gave a presentation to a group of investment analysts for the Citibank, and they're all metaphorically throwing rocks at me at this point. And I said, well, tell me, how many of you make a judgment about the financial health of a company on one financial metric? Which one are you going to choose? And they, agreed. Same goes for safety. It's okay. I promise I'll leave time for questions, and you can ask me hard questions. And process safety, by the way, is my industry's jargon for catastrophic hazards or major accident events. Okay, so that was the controversial bit. What I just want to move on to say is that if you did choose to do something more around senior leadership behaviours, competences, this is well-trod ground. It doesn't mean that it's all answered for you, but I'm just reassuring you that others have taken that view and have put some effort in. So the Institute of Directors, roughly equivalent to the Australian Institute of Company Directors, has produced excellent guidance on health, safety and environment leadership in general. Not focused on major accidents or mining, but in general. It's good general guidance. Commend that to you. The Institute of Chemical Engineers have done what you'd expect them to do, focused on the process industries, but again, high quality guidance. UK HSC, the major regulator in the UK, has produced a variety of guidance, usually supporting those first two behind the scenes. And if you pick up the Institute of Directors guidance, you'll see a credit to UK HSC. The same goes with the IChemE. I think I've got an example of the UK HSC guidance I'll just pull up shortly. And of course, because I'm a pommy bastard, or used to be, I travel now on an Australian passport, you'll be pleased to hear, or not. I must give an Australian example, and the National Offshore Petroleum Safety Environmental Management Authority, used to be NOPSA, now NOPSEMA, that has published guidance, and that's quite good as well. Interestingly, this document is couched purely in behaviours. It's about the behaviours that should be exhibited by a senior executive. And I know the person who commissioned this work, and this person hired a senior person, a senior leader in industry who had just retired to write it. Typical way of working of UK HSC, get somebody who really knows this stuff and widely respected. So yes, it's published by UK HSC, actually written by a senior leader from industry. I worked for UK HSC for 27 years so, as a regulator, so I can't help but have fond memories of some aspects of that work. Okay, what was my task today? My task was really to help put some information out there to help you decide what you wish to focus on in the future. I've already nailed my colours to the mast. I think there's an opportunity for you here. And just let me say a little bit about those three areas. I've said something, thank you very much, that's the 20 minutes, that's good. So let me say something about those three dot points there. On the knowledge of safety concepts, I've given some brief examples in an earlier slide. Really what I'm saying here, a potential framework, a potential conceptual framework that you could consider is to say, what do senior leaders need to know as individuals to do their work effectively in relation to safety? What knowledge aspects are they? The second one is, well, how should they behave with their immediate team? Let me give an example. We all know how difficult it is to get bad news to travel up organisations. Well, common situation. Ray Griggs, the Chief of Navy, went to see the Prime Minister in the face of Cyclone Yasi to tell her what ships he was going to put to sea to support Queenslanders. The next day he went back to tell her that one ship was being scrapped with immediate effect. One wasn't fit to sail outside of the Heads, but it could sail from Garden Island as far as the Heads before the swell got too bad, and another one was going in for 6 months intensive, deep maintenance. How did he get into that situation? Well, it's all documented in the Paul Rizzo's report. Paul Rizzo is a non-executive director of the NAB. He wrote an excellent report, and one of the key issues was Navy leadership did not encourage bad news to travel upwards. Fundamental. Few things are perfect. If you, what do they say? Alcoholics, they can't reform unless they accept there's a problem. You have to know, you can't manage problems you don't know about. So that's an example of some of the behaviours with their immediate team that could be considered. And the action behaviours at the sharp end, many of them are already written up here, but it's about what they focus on. So if you're engaged in underground coal mining, you cannot go to the work site and just talk about things that result in slip, strips, sprains and strains, where most of the feedback comes from. And this is the dilemma. We get most feedback, most of the safety data are about low potential, minor incidents. That's what populates LTIFR data, total recordables. You don't get feedback on disasters. When you do, it's too late. So you have to actively work out what they are in advance and consciously and go and look at those. And that's another example of where knowledge for senior executives and behaviours need to come together, and you can help them with this, because I can see all the competencies to do that are in this room. I'm not sure why, I don't know why the word John is in there. I don't know how that slipped in. It's obviously a human error on my part. And of course, that's what this slide is about, human error. So too often the view from senior people is that, well, the person who's got hurt was the person who didn't take the precautions, ipso facto was at fault. And it's a very neat circle. It's not the case. This is an example of the fundamental attribution error, as it's called in human factors terms. It's where it leads to blameworthy statements. And the real issue here, as with many human error issues, nobody should be allowed to sit on an airline seat with a switch that can allow the wings to fall off. Well, the industrial equivalent of that is to have a valve that can be turned the wrong way, that you can open and cause catastrophic consequences without it being interlocked. So paradoxically, most of the solutions to human errors are design and engineering solutions. I know it's paradoxical, but it's the case when it comes to disasters. So I put that slide up to encourage people to focus more on what I would call not associated non-technical skills, with all due respect to Rona, who I know and love. She's a really high caliber human factors specialist. I'm delighted that you're using that as some inspiration, because it's a very good book. But a better term is human factors, or human and organisational factors. So that's it. I'm hoping I've left 5 minutes for some questions. Thank you very much. And that's just to reassure you some of those references are there.